The great hall of Valeholm had been built to hold 1,000 souls, and on the morning of the binding, it held every one of them. Yet the loudest thing in it was the silence at its center. That silence had a shape. It sat on the high dais in the form of a man, and around him the flagstones lay empty for the length of 3 long strides in every direction. No steward stood at his shoulder, no page waited at his knee. The lords and ladies of Kelvard pressed themselves along the walls, rather than drift a single step into that ring of open floor, and the reason they gave their children when their children asked was always the same. That is the Cold King. You do not go near him. You do not touch him. If you are wise, you do not let your shadow fall across his boots. Lynette heard the whispers before she reached the doors, because whispers were the only warmth a hollow girl was ever given. She came up the long aisle with her hood drawn close and her hands folded, and she steadied herself the way she always had, by naming small warm things under her breath: a lit hearth, new bread, the sun on a south wall in spring. It was a child's habit, and she had never grown out of it, and this morning she needed every one of them, because this morning they meant to bind her to Lord Ferran, and she did not think she could bear to be looked at that closely. They had raised her at Braywick as a ward, in a house too poor to feed her, and too proud to say so. When her father Edrin died owing more than he owned, she had become a debt with a face, and a debt could be paid in only one coin. So they had washed her, and dressed her, and promised her to Ferran, the king's golden cousin, the heir the court expected to crown one day. It sealed a border pact with the northern clans of Draymore, and settled her father's name. And it cost her everything, and no one had ever thought to ask a hollow girl what a thing should cost. She kept her eyes down and did not look at the dais. Everyone had warned her not to. Ferran waited at the low altar in white and gold, smiling the smile that had undone half the ladies of the court, and for a moment Lynette let herself hope he might be kind. Beautiful people could afford to be kind, and perhaps this once the cost would be gentle. The binding of Alphys was not a thing of words, it was a thing of scent. When the priestess lifted her hands and called for the joining, Ferran was meant to lean close and take his bride's scent into himself, to know her the way wolves knew all things, by the truth that lived under the skin. He turned to Lynette. He drew back her hood with 2 fingers, slow and certain, sure of what he would find. He breathed her in, and found nothing. She watched it happen on his face, the way a man's expression falls when the floor he trusted is not there. He leaned closer, frowning now, and breathed again. And again there was nothing, because there was nothing in her to find. No scent, no rank the moon would recognize, no warmth for a wolf to read. A hollow. The hall had heard the word before, whispered, the way you whisper a sickness, and now they saw it, and 600 people drew one breath at once. Ferran stepped back, as though she had struck him. "What is this?" he said, not quietly. He said it to the priestess, to the steward, to the whole staring hall, to everyone but her. "You brought me a hollow. You dressed a nothing in my colors and led it to my altar." "My lord," the steward began. "No," Ferran's voice climbed. "I will not bind my house to an empty thing. Let the clans have their war. Let the pact rot. I will not do it." He looked at Lynette, then, finally, and what was in his face was worse than cruelty. It was disgust made comfortable. Disgust that knew it would never be questioned. "She is no one," he said, "and I will not wed no one." The hall came apart into noise. Lynette stood very still in the center of it, in her borrowed white, and did not let her chin drop. That was the one thing that was hers, the only thing they had never managed to take. She lifted it a little, and she named her warm things, hearth and bread and sun. And she waited for the floor to open and swallow her, and it did not, because floors were never that merciful. The steward, an old wolf named Baranak, with a face like a folded map, was trying to be heard over the uproar. The pact, he kept saying, the pact. The northern clans had sent their sons south on the promise of this binding, and a broken promise to the men of Draymore was not an insult. It was a season of burned villages. Ferran had just set that fire, with 4 words and a smile, and he did not appear to care, because Ferran had never in his life been the one to feel the heat. Then the pact fails, Ferran said, spreading his hands to the hall as if inviting them to agree. Better a war than a farce. There will be no war, the voice came from the ring of empty floor that no one crossed. Every head in the hall turned, and every head, having turned, wished it had not. The cold king had risen from the dais. He stood at the edge of his circle of open stone, and the cold came off him the way heat comes off a forge, so that the nearest banners stirred and stiffened with frost at their hems. He was younger than the stories made him, and taller, and he wore black gloves to the wrist, though the hall was warm, and there was a stillness in him that was not calm. It was the stillness of a man holding something in with both hands. His name was Soren, and he had worn the crown of Kelvard for 9 years, and in 9 years no living soul had touched him and kept the hand. "Cousin," Ferran said, and for the first time his smile faltered. "This is not your concern. A broken pact is the crown's concern." Soren did not raise his voice. He did not have to. "You have refused the bride? Very well, she is refused." His pale eyes moved to Lynette, and she felt the cold of that look go through her, and under the cold, strangely, something else. Something that fixed on her the way you notice the one quiet thing in a loud room. "I will take her." For a moment no one breathed at all. "You cannot mean it," Ferran said. "She is hollow. She is nothing. You would bind the royal line to a girl with no scent, no house, no. I would end a war you started for the price of your pride." The frost crept another handspan across the stones. "The bride is claimed by me." Lynette did not understand what was happening, only that the whole room had turned to look at her again, and that this time the looks were not disgust. They were pity, which was worse. Brannock had gone the color of ash. The priestess's hands were shaking as she raised them a second time, over a second groom, and spoke the joining that no words could carry, only nearness, only scent, and Lynette realized with a lurch that a binding needed the alphas to stand close, and that no one stood close to the cold king and lived. Soren did not come close. He stood across the empty circle and let the priestess speak the rite over the distance, and when it was done, he inclined his head to her the smallest amount, and it was finished. She was bound. She was queen. As the court began to move, stunned, murmuring, Brannock came to her side and spoke low and fast, the way you speak when what you are saying might save a life. "Whatever you do, my lady," he said, "do not touch him. No bride of his has ever seen a second season, and every one of them made the same mistake." Lynette looked across the emptying hall to the man she had just been given to, wrapped in his ring of frozen air, and understood that she had traded a lord who found her worth nothing for a husband whose nearness was a blade. She did not yet know which of the two she ought to fear. More, "Do not touch him." It was the first thing anyone said to her at Vale Home, and it was the last thing she heard every night, and within a week, Lynette understood that the whole cold keep had been built around those 3 words, like a fortress around a wound. The king ate alone. He was served by gloved hands that set the plates down and withdrew before he reached for them. He passed through his own halls inside a moving hollow of empty air, and the servants had learned to read the frost that bloomed on stone and iron when he was near, so that a rhymed door handle was a warning as plain as a shout. His chambers no one entered, his bath was drawn and left. When he rode, the grooms backed away, and let him take the horse himself, and the horse, Lynette noticed, was the only living thing in Valeholm that did not flinch from him, perhaps because a horse could not be told the stories. She learned the stories anyway. Brannock gave them to her carefully, a little at a time, the way you feed someone who has been starving. The king had not been born cold. As a boy of 7, he had wandered onto the high moor, in a snow that came from nowhere, and something had found him there, a rime which, the old ones said, a hungry white thing out of the deep of winter, and it had laid its hand on him and gone. What it left behind grew. Year by year, the cold sank deeper into him, into his blood and his bones, and it took from him first his warmth and then his touch. Until now, a moment's contact with his skin burned like frost eats a bare hand. Quick, it burned whoever touched him. It burned him worse. And it was still sinking. Brannock did not say the last part, but Linnet heard it under his voice. The thing the whole court feared to say aloud. One day, the cold would reach the king's heart, and stop it, and the line would pass to Farron, and there would be no more Soren at all. There is a tale, Brannock admitted once, that the cold could be lifted. The old women tell it. That if one soul held him freely, wanting nothing, not the crown, not the cure, only him, the rhyme, would let go. He shook his head. But no one can hold him, and no one who knew the tale could ever want only him, and not the ending of it. So it is a tale, and nothing more. Linnet said nothing. But that night alone she pressed her own bare hand flat against the frozen window, and wondered what it was to be a person the whole world was warned against. She had her own thing. She did not say aloud. She was not truly hollow. She had made herself hollow, learned it as a starving child learns to be quiet, pulling her scent down and down inside herself until nothing showed, because what she truly was had a name that men had once hunted, and the mask was the only reason she was alive. But the mask took strength to hold, and when she was tired it thinned, and lately she was always tired. She had counted on being forgotten in some far corner of the keep. She had not counted on marrying the one man in Kelvard who saw everything. She met him properly on the 9th day in the West Gallery, by accident, which was the only way anyone met the cold king. She had not known he was there. She came around the corner with her arms full of the linens. No maid would carry near his rooms, and a tall casement stood open, and the wind took it, and the heavy iron frame swung hard toward the king's unguarded head. Linnet did not think. She dropped the linens and reached both hands out to catch it before it struck him. Her hands closed on the iron a breath from his face, and her wrist brushed the edge of his jaw. The frost came so fast she felt it as light before she felt it as pain. He wrenched back with a sound she would not forget, and the whole casement flowered white with rime in an instant, and for one terrible moment she was certain her hand was gone. Soren's face, that close, was not the mask the court saw. It was open, and it was in agony, and under the agony was a fear so old and so bare that it did not belong to a king at all. She had a single heartbeat to see it, and then he was on his feet, and gone. 3 strides of empty floor, thrown back between them, his gloved hands fisted at his sides, as though he did not trust them. Do not ever. Linnet looked down at her wrist, braced for the gray ruin of frostburn. There was nothing. Her skin was whole. It was not even cold. Or, she had touched the man no one could touch, and she had felt no cold at all. And across the empty air between them, she watched Soren realize it too. Watched the fear in his face change into something far more dangerous than fear. And far off in the keep, a door she had not heard open eased shut again, and someone who had been sent to watch the Hollow Queen went quietly to carry word north, to the golden cousin who had refused her, that the cold king's bride had not died as brides of his were meant to. For 3 days after the gallery, the king did not send for her, and Linnet told herself she was relieved. She was not. She lay awake in the queen's cold rooms, and turned her wrist over in the dark, feeling still the absence of the burn where his jaw had touched it. Every soul in Vale Home knew what the king's touch did. She was the one exception in the world, and to be an exception is a loneliness all its own. On the 4th night, Brannock came to her, wringing his gloved hands. The trouble, he explained, was the fires. The king's rooms had to be kept warm, or the rime in him sank faster, the cold within reaching for the cold without. But no servant could lay a fire in his presence and keep their fingers. and the king would not quit his rooms to let them work. 2 maids had already been hurt. The last had lost the feeling in 3 fingers and would not go back, and Linnet could not blame her. "You are the only one," Brannock said, and did not finish, because they both knew the shape of it. She was the only creature in the keep whose nearness his cold did not answer. The Hollow Queen, good for one thing. At last, so Linnet went to tend the king's fire, and that was how the nights began. His solar was a high round room at the top of the North Tower, the coldest warm place she had ever stood in, a fire roaring in the great hearth, and frost still ferning the insides of the windows. Soren sat far back from the flames in a tall chair, gloved, still, watching her the way a man watches a thing he does not trust himself to want. A second chair had been set out. She marked the distance of it from his, exact, a careful 3 strides, and understood that he had paced it off himself. She built the fire up. She had learned, across a whole life of being unwanted, how to make herself useful without being seen, and it was a strange thing now to do that old work under a gaze that followed her hands. When it was done, she sat in the chair that had been left for her because no one had told her not to, and because she was weary of being told. "You should be afraid of me," he said. It was the first thing he had said to her since the gallery. "I have been afraid of a great many people," Linnet answered. "Most of them could smell it on me. You cannot. It is almost restful." Something moved across his face that in a warmer man might have been the start of a smile. That was the strangeness of it, she would think afterward. He could not read her. A wolf knew another wolf the way you know the weather, by the truth coming off the skin, and she gave off nothing at all. So the king of Kelvard, who could take the measure of any liar in his hall on a single breath, had no way to measure her but the slow way, the old way, by looking and listening and asking. And she, unseen her whole life, because there was nothing in her to scent, found herself looked at, truly looked at, for the first time she could remember. They talked of small things at first. The long, cold, that no one at court would name to his face. He asked her questions, and waited on the answers as though they were worth the waiting, and she gave him carefully, keeping the one great secret folded down small, inside her, offering him all the lesser true things that lay around it. On the 3rd such night, he asked her what it was to be hollow, not cruelly. He asked it the way he asked everything now, as though her answer might teach him a thing he needed. No one had ever wanted to know before. "It is quiet," she told him. "A room that no one comes into. You learn to keep yourself company." He was silent a long while, gloved hands folded, the fire throwing its light across him and taking it back again. "I know that room," he said. It was all he said, but it was the nearest thing to being understood that Linnet had felt in her life, and she had to look hard into the flames so that he would not see what it did to her, until she remembered that he could not have scented it in any case. Only seen it. He was looking at her. He had seen it. When the candles had guttered low, he said, "You may go." She rose. At the door, his voice caught her, and it was not quite steady. "Will you come again tomorrow?" It was not shaped as a question. He did not know how to ask for a thing, she saw then. He had spent 9 years sending the whole world back from him, and had forgotten the words for, "Come closer." Yes. And as she drew the door shut, she looked back once, and saw that the frost on the inner windows had pulled away from the glass, a clean dark ring of it, melted clear in the warm heart of the room, nearer his chair than Frost had dared sit in years. She did not think he had noticed it. She noticed. The court had decided what Linnet was, and once the court decided a thing, it did not trouble itself to be right. By day she was the Hollow Queen, and the word followed her down every corridor, soft and steady as falling ash. They said she should have died, as the king's brides died, and had not, which made her something worse than hollow. They said she had charmed him, that no natural woman could sit a night in the cold tower and come down warm. They said, most of all and most quietly, that she had cost them their true king, that golden Ferran, should one day have worn the crown by right, and that this scentless nothing out of a debtor's house stood somehow between him and it. Lynette kept her chin up, and named her warm things and let it wash over her, for she had been hated by finer rooms than this. But the hatred had an edge she did not understand, an eagerness to it, as though the whole court were waiting on something it already knew was coming. The day before, in the long gallery, a beautiful woman had swept past her, with 3 ladies trailing, and stopped, as though only then noticing the queen. "Your Majesty." She had curtsied a hair too deep, so the whole gallery might enjoy the joke of it. "We are all so glad to find you keeping well. We did so fear the cold tower would prove too much for a delicate thing like you." The ladies had smiled behind their hands. Lynette had inclined her head and said that she was very well, and thank you, and walked on with her back straight, and heard the laughter begin before she reached the door. She had not known then who the woman was, only that she was lovely and cruel and certain of herself. She would learn the rest soon enough. She learned what? On a grey afternoon, in the old mews below the north wall. She had gone there for the quiet, to be where the falcons were and the courtiers were not, and she was standing in the dim of the empty hall when she heard Ferrand's voice through the stones, out in the falconer's yard, and went still. He was not alone. The woman with him laughed low, and Lynette knew the laugh before she found the face at the gap in the wall. Ondine of House Vantry, the same low, sweet voice that had mocked her in the gallery the day before. Vantry was a climbing house, 2 generations of it, and Ondine climbed better than any of them. "You fret too much," Ondine was saying. "A childless king is a dying king. You have only to outlast him." "I outlasted," Ferrand said. "And now he keeps a wife in his tower, and comes down looking a good deal less than dead. Do you know what they say in the low hall? That the frost is drawing back off his windows?" A silence. When Ondine spoke again, the warmth had gone out of her. "Then she is not what we sent him." Lynette's blood turned to ice. "We sent him." She pressed herself to the cold stone, and made herself hear it, and piece by piece, it came together, uglier than anything the court had whispered. It had been House Bantry that paid her guardian at Braywick, and paid him well, to dress the hollow ward in Ferrand's colours, and lead her to the altar, a bride Ferrand could refuse before 600 witnesses. A refusal no man could fault him for, since who would bind a golden heir to a scentless nothing? He would stay unwed and free, and Ondine would keep him, and one day when the cold king died without a child, the crown would fall to Ferrand and Ferrand to Vantry, and the whole of it would wear the face of fate, instead of a thing they had built with their own hands. They had never meant her to matter. She had been a prop, a thing to be refused, and swept aside. Instead, the cold king had reached across his ring of empty floor and taken the prop up. And now the prop was a queen whose nearness was thawing the very frost they had counted on to bury him. "She has to go," Ferrand said, in the voice a man uses to order a horse sold, before the winter feast, while the court is still gathered to see the king strong and childless, and glad of it. "Quietly," said Ondine. "However, it must be done." Lynette did not remember leaving the mews. She knew only that she was on the stair again. In the light, her heart slamming, the whole shape of it laid cold and plain before her. The next time the court gathered under one roof, they meant for her to die. And the one man in the keep with the power to stand between her, and it was a man she could not warn without confessing she had listened at a wall. A man who could not read the truth from her skin as he read it from everyone. A man who trusted almost no living soul, and had every reason on earth not to begin with the hollow bride his enemies had planted in his own hall. She stood on the stair with her hand tight on the cold rail and made herself breathe. She had kept herself alive for 21 years by being too small a thing to be worth the killing. That shield was gone now. She was a queen, and a queen was worth a great deal to the people who wanted her in the ground. That night she did not tend the fire. She sent word that she was unwell, and sat alone in the queen's rooms with a single candle, and let herself be afraid. She had spent her whole life learning that warmth kept a price. A hollow child, taken in by a house that resented the feeding of her, had learned it early, that a kind word was a loan and a warm hand a bill not yet come due. And here was the warmest thing she had ever been handed: those quiet hours in the high tower, with a man teaching himself to ask her to stay. And here, hard on its heels, came the reckoning. There was always a reckoning. She watched the frost climb the inside of her own cold window, feathering white across the glass, lovely and spreading and cold clean through, and she thought that this was the truer picture of her life, not the fire. The frost that came for it after. Let us pause here a short while. If you would like to be here when the next part goes up, take a breath and follow along. It helps more than you know, and yet, she thought of the ring of clear glass melted warm beside his chair, closer than Frost had sat in years. She thought of a man who had sent the whole world back from him and had, in the end, asked one hollow girl to come again. Whatever the court believed, whatever Ferran and Ondine had built brick by patient brick, something was happening in that tower that none of them had planned for herself, least of all. The question was no longer whether she could survive the king, it was whether she could save him. And to do that, she was going to have to get closer to the one man in all the world it was death to touch. She went back to the tower the next night, and the night after, and she went with a purpose in her now that had not been there before. If her touch did not burn, then she was the one the old tale meant. She turned it over and over as she climbed the stair, one soul to hold him, wanting nothing. She wanted nothing from him, did she? Not the crown, which had brought her only enemies. Not even, she told herself, the cure. Though she wanted him to live so fiercely it frightened her. Perhaps that was near enough. Perhaps she could be the thing that saved him. And if she could, then all the court's hatred and all of Ferran's scheming would come to nothing, because a living king with his cold lifted feared no one. But hope was a dangerous thing to carry through Valeholm just then. The whispers had sharpened into something with a shape and a schedule. She caught the ladies of House Vantry counting days on their fingers and smiling. She saw Ferran keep late company with men who wore no house colors and left by the servants' doors. The whole court had the held breath of a room waiting for a thing to be done, and Lynette read it clearly. Whatever they meant for her was coming soon, and the only shield she had was a dying man who would not let her lift a hand to help him. She should have told him about the muse. She meant to. But every time she came near it, he turned the danger aside, like a man brushing snow from his sleeve. "They have wanted me dead for 9 years," he said, when she pressed him to keep a guard, to not sit so open at the coming feast. Cousins and councils and climbing houses, it is the one steady thing in my reign. You need not lose sleep over what I lost sleep over long ago. This is different, Lynette said. This time they have a plan and a day. They always have a plan and a day. His voice held no anger, only a weariness worn down to the bone. Let them come. There is not a great deal left of me for them to take. That was the opening, and she took it, before her courage could fail her. There is a way, she said. The tale Brannock told me that the rhyme could be lifted if one held you. Sorin, in the gallery, when I caught the casement, my skin touched yours, and it did not burn. I felt no cold at all. The words came quickly now. I could try. I could be the one. If there is any chance that I could hold the cold back from you, then, let me. No. It was flat, and it was final, and it fell between them like an iron door dropped in its frame. You do not understand what you ask. He had risen from his chair, and the frost was climbing the walls again, fast, the way it climbed, when his grip on it slipped. You felt no cold for the space of one breath by accident in a fright, and you would wager your hand on it. Your arm, your life. You have seen what I do to the ones who touch me. You saw the maid's fingers. That was different. I am. You are hollow, and you believe it makes you safe, and you do not know that it does not. His eyes were terrible to look at. I will not be the thing that kills you. I have buried enough. I will not lay you in the ground beside them. Do you hear me? You will not touch me again, not to save me, not for anything under the sky." Lynette stood very still. She had offered him the one thing she owned, the single gift no other soul in the world could give him, and he had flung it back as though it turned his stomach. That was what it felt like, standing in the climbing frost. Not protection, refusal. He would freeze by inches sooner than let the hollow girl lay a hand on him, even him, then. Even here, at the cold end of the world, there was a door that would not open to her. "As you wish, your majesty," she said. And her voice did not shake, for she had long practice at not shaking. And she gave him the small, exact curtsy owed a king. And she left him there with his cold and did not tend his fire. She did not see how he watched the door after it had shut. She did not feel, because he could not send it across to her, and she was too wounded to look for it, the thing that broke across his face, the moment she was gone. She lay awake that night with her hands fisted at her sides, and told herself she would not go back. She had survived a whole life of being refused, by expecting nothing, and she had grown careless, and let herself expect something from him. That was the danger of warmth. It made you forget the frost was still out there, waiting. She would keep him alive if she could, from a distance, as a duty, and fold the rest of herself down small where nothing could reach it. It was a good resolution. It lasted until the heralds cried the feast. 2 mornings after, they cried it through the keep. The winter feast would be held on the longest night. 5 days hence, the whole court gathered under one roof to look upon their king, exactly as Ferran had promised, exactly as they had chosen to bury her. The longest night came, and Valeholm blazed against it. Every sconce was lit, every hearth roaring, the great hall dressed in white and silver and hung with the frost that gathered wherever the king sat, so that for once his cold looked less a curse than a crown. The whole court had come. They pressed the long tables and lined the walls, and lifted their cups to a king they meant to be rid of. And at the high seat, Sorin sat gloved and still, and watched them over the rims of their own glasses, and Lynette sat the careful distance from him that everyone had learned to leave. She had not spoken to him in 5 days. He had not sent for her. But she had not stopped watching the doors, and the crowd and the hands of every man who came too near, because whatever lay between them, she would not sit and let them kill him for want of a warning, and she would not let them kill her without a fight, either. The feast wore on toward midnight, like a slow, bright animal, and under all of it ran a current Lynette could feel in her teeth. Too many people watched the high seat, too many hands stayed out of sight. Ondine moved through the hall, touching sleeves and murmuring, and every time the great doors opened to let in the cold, her heart lurched, waiting. At midnight, the court rose to bring the king his cup, the old rite of the longest night, the whole hall surging up the floor toward the high seat in a bright press of bodies. And in that press, in the crush and the noise, and the raised cups, a man came at Lynette from the side, with a thin, bright blade held low against his hip. She saw it too late. She had time to understand that she was going to die, and no time at all to move. Sorin moved. A dying man should not have been able to cross that space, and he crossed it. He struck her aside with one bare hand, his glove gone, his palm flat against her shoulder, and for the length of a heartbeat, his skin was on hers, and there was no cold in it, none, only the shove that flung her clear of the blade. And then he caught the assassin's wrist in his other bare hand, and held on. The frost came out of him like a thing let off a chain. It went up the man's arm in a gray climbing bloom, faster than a scream, and the blade fell ringing to the stone, and the man fell after it, gray to the shoulder, and did not rise. But the cold that Sorin had loosed to do it did not go back where it belonged. Lynette saw the moment it turned on him. She saw him understand it. The rhyme he had spent 9 years holding at bay tore free all at once, and drove inward into his chest, toward the one place it had never yet reached. And the king of Kelvard went down among the fallen cups with frost blooming white across his lips. The hall came apart into screaming. Half the court recoiled from the grey dead man, and half surged forward, and Ferran's voice was somewhere in it shouting for the guard, and Ondine's face, when Linnet found it across the chaos, was not afraid at all. It was watching. It was measuring. It had wanted this. Only not, perhaps, exactly this. They carried him to the tower, because only there could the one person who could bear his nearness tend him, and that person was Linnet, and she did not leave his side again. The healer came, an old woman with steady hands, and laid her palm above his heart and went grey herself, though not from the cold. "It has gone deep," she said, "deeper than I have ever known it go, and the man live. It sits against his heart now like a stone in a stream." She looked at Linnet with something that was almost pity. "And the wolf in him has gone silent. He will not shift again. If he wakes at all, he wakes a man with winter in his chest, and I do not think, my lady, that he will see the turn of the season." Then she left, because there was nothing more that medicine could do for a cold that medicine had never touched. Linnet sat down in the chair, 3 strides from the bed, the chair he had paced off himself a lifetime ago, and looked at the man who had crossed a hall he should not have been able to cross to strike her from a blade's path. 5 days he had refused to let her risk a hand for him, and then he had spent his whole self on her, in the space of a breath, as though her life had never once been in question. She stayed. She kept the fire high. She spoke to him, though he did not answer. Small, warm, foolish things, hearth and bread and sun, on a south wall, the whole poor list of her childhood, said aloud now to a dying king, because she had nothing else to give him, and could not bear the silence. The night wore on and on. The frost crept back across the windows, no matter how she fed the flames. And near the grey hour before dawn, when she had been awake past all her strength, she sank down onto the edge of the bed beside him only for a moment, only to rest her eyes, and her body betrayed her. And she slept. She slept, and in sleeping she leaned, and her cheek came to rest against the king's shoulder. She did not feel the cold, because there was none for her, but she felt, in her sleep, something she had never felt in her waking life. She felt him. His pain came into her first, fast and old, and grinding a cold that had been eating him alive since he was 7 years, small, on a white moor. And under the pain, his loneliness. Worse than the pain, a solitude so complete it had its own weather. And under even that, threaded faint, through all of it, warm where nothing in him should have been warm, she felt what he carried for her, and had carried, and had refused, and had hidden behind an iron door, so that it would never be the thing that got her killed. It was not like being told a thing. It was like standing inside it. For as long as her cheek lay against him, she was not a hollow girl at all, but a whole weather of him, his cold and his grief, and his stubborn buried tenderness, and it should have frightened her to be so far inside another soul, and it did not. It felt like the opposite of being hollow, it felt like being filled, and where her cheek rested against him, the cold drew back. She did not wake to know it, but he did. Soren surfaced out of the dark near dawn to a thing he had not known in 9 years. Rest. The rime had pulled away from his heart, back and back, retreating from the small warm weight against his shoulder, like a tide going out, and for the first time since the moor he did not hurt, he lay very still so as not to wake her. He looked at the hollow girl, asleep against him, unburned, breathing slow. The frost melted clear in a wide ring around them both, and he understood 2 things at once, and did not know which frightened him more. That she was killing his cold, simply by being near him, and that across a keep, full of enemies, someone had surely already carried word that the queen's touch was the one thing in the world that could keep the cold king alive. They left Vale home before the moon was old. Brannock arranged it, quietly, in the way of a man who has served 3 kings and learned where the quiet doors are. The court believed the king had withdrawn to die out of their sight, and let him go gladly, and Farron let him go most gladly of all, for a king who crept away to die in a far corner was a king half buried already. Only Brannock knew the truth, that the king left Valeholm because Lynette asked it, and that Lynette asked it because she had somewhere to take him that no one would think to look, and because she could not save him among 600 people who wanted him dead. She took him to Suncroft. It had been her father's once, a small, warm holding on the south face of the hills, forgotten in the long, slow ruin of Edrin's debts, half wild now, its orchard gone to bramble and its low stone house sunk in ivy. But the hill behind it breathed. A hot spring rose there, deep in the rock, so that even in the heart of winter the little valley steamed gently, and the grass stayed green, and it was the one warm place in all of cold Kelvard, and it was the place Lynette had been happy, once, before the world had taught her what she was worth. She had not seen it in 7 years, and had feared it would be smaller than she remembered. The way the places of childhood always are, it was not. It was only quieter. The gate hung crooked and the well gone green at the lip, but the spring still breathed in the rock behind it, and the warm air still hung over the little valley, like a held blessing, and when she laid her hand flat against the sun-warm stone of the doorway, something in her chest that had been clenched tight since the altar let go all at once. Here, away from the gloves and the cleared floors and the frozen protocol of the court, something eased in both of them. He grew a little stronger, though never strong. He could sit in the warm grass by the spring and feel the sun, which he had not been able to bear near for years, for the cold in him had always answered warmth by biting deeper, and now the cold was quieter and the sun was only sun. She would sit near him, and not too near, for the fear was still in him, and she had not forgotten the tower, when she had offered and he had refused. They did not speak of that. They spoke of everything else. And the strange bond that had opened between them in the grey hour did not close again. She felt it always now, faint when they were apart, a low warmth like a banked fire, and stronger when they were near, so that she knew his moods before he showed them, knew the grief that took him, when he watched a hawk stoop, and remembered the wolf he would never wear again, knew the guilt that ate him whenever he looked at her. She never spoke of that either. She only learned to bring him back from it with a jest or a question or the small warm list that had become a thing between them, hearth and bread and sun, until the corner of his hard mouth would lift despite him. "You are always watching me," he said one afternoon by the spring, the steam rising white around them. "Someone has to," she said. "You do it so poorly yourself." He laughed. It was a rough, unused sound, as though the machinery of it had rusted, and it undid her a little every time he told her things, in the warm valley, that she did not think he had told anyone. He told her about the boy he had been before the moor, a second son with an older brother meant for the crown, free in a way a king could never be, who had loved the high country and the long hunts and the feel of the wind through a wolf's coat. He told her about the day the fever took his brother and the crown came sideways to a cold half-grown thing that could not be embraced at his own crowning, and how the court had drawn back from him that day and never once, in 9 years, drawn near again. He did not tell it for pity. He told it plainly, and she felt through the bond that he was giving her the only coin he had left, the truth of himself, and she took it and held it carefully, the way you hold a thing that cannot be replaced. It was there, in the warm valley, that she gave him a piece of the truth in return. "I was not born hollow," she told him, not looking at him, watching the steam instead. "I made myself so, when I was small. There was a reason a girl like me had to be nothing, had to give a wolf's nose nothing to find, and so I learned to pull it all down inside myself and hold it there, my whole self, folded down small, until there was nothing left on the outside to read. I have held it so long I forget sometimes that there is anything under it at all," she swallowed. "That is the true shape of me, not empty, hidden. There is a difference. though no one has ever cared to know it. She had never said so much of it aloud to a living soul. She waited for the flinch, the careful distance, the reassessment that always came when people learned there was more to her than the nothing they had settled for. It did not come. He only watched her with those clear eyes and let the truth sit between them, unhurried, as though it were a thing worth the room it took up. "Thank you," he said instead, which was the right thing, the only thing. And she loved him so much, in that moment, that it was hard to breathe. She turned to him. He was close, closer than the fear usually let him come. His eyes had gone to her mouth, and her whole body leaned toward the warmth of him, without her telling it to, and for one bright, reckless instant, she thought she would tell him all of it, the whole hidden truth of herself, and let the doors swing wide. Then she felt it, the mask, thinning. A lifetime of holding herself down, worn ragged by exhaustion and grief and the sheer warm nearness of him, slipping so that any breath now might carry up out of her the scent she had buried her whole life to hide, the scent that had a name men killed for. If he caught it, he would know what she was, and what she was could not be near him, could not save him, could only be hunted and taken and used, exactly as her kind had always been. She pulled back so fast it hurt them both. "Forgive me," she said on her feet, already turning. And in the same moment, down the long track from the north, a rider came hard into the little valley on a horse flecked with foam, wearing Brannock's colors, and the look on his face told her the world had found them after all. The rider brought two things, and neither was good. The first was that Farron had not waited for the king to die. He had stood before the council and named the thing they had all been circling. A king who could not shift was no alpha. A king dying of a cold no healer could touch was no king. A king who had fled his own hall in the arms of a scentless nobody was bewitched, unfit, finished. Farron asked the council to name a regent until the crown could pass cleanly, and everyone in that room knew that a regent was only a king who had not yet said the word aloud. The council had not refused him. They had asked for time. Time was the last thing Soren had. The rider had more of it, and none of it better. The northern clans of Draymore, hearing the king was dying, had begun to test the border again, and the council saw a strong cousin promising strength and a rightful king dying in a far ditch. It was not a difficult sum for frightened men to do. Half of them had already begun to say Farron's name, the way you say a thing that has been decided. The second thing the rider brought was quieter and worse. Ward had reached Farron as Lynette had feared it would, from the moment she woke against the king's shoulder, that the queen's touch stayed the rhyme. And a man who wanted the king dead, hearing that one woman in the world could keep him alive, did not need to be told twice what to do about the woman. "They will come for you," Soren said, when she had told him all of it. His face had gone still and cold in a way she had not seen since the hall. "Not for me, for you. To be certain, nothing can undo what the cold is already doing." He turned away from her, to the window, to the steaming green of the valley that had been, for a handful of days, something close to peace. "You have to go tonight. Brannock can take you west, to the coast, out of Kelvard entirely. There are ships. I am not leaving you. You are the queen of a dying king. When I am gone, and I will be gone, by the turn of the season, you are a widow, with no house, no scent, no protector, and a great deal of value to a man who needs you cold in the ground." He said it evenly, as a steward reads accounts, and only through the bond did she feel what it cost him, the thing tearing under the flat calm of his voice. "If you let the marriage be undone now, quietly, before the end, you are only a hollow girl again. Nobody hunts a hollow girl. You can disappear, you can live, and you will die. I was always going to die." He still would not look at her. "I have made my peace with it. I have not made my peace with watching them do to you what they mean to do. Then let me stay and be watched, she said. I have been in danger my whole life. I know how to live small and quiet and unkilled. I am better at it than you could ever be. Not when they know what your touch does. Not when every hour you keep me breathing is an hour you spend as the most valuable and most hunted woman in Kelvard. He turned from the window at last and looked at her, and the flat calm cracked, and under it she saw the thing the bond had been telling her all along, the fear, huge and helpless. I have spent 9 years learning to want nothing, because wanting was a door the cold could come through. Do you understand what it is, then, to want this much? To want you safe, more than I want, to draw another breath. I cannot fight the cold, and Farran, and my own counsel, and also lie awake every night listening for the men who will come to take you. I cannot. I have nothing left to fight them with. The only thing I can still do for you is make you not worth taking. So let me. Lynette crossed the room to him, close, closer than the fear usually allowed, and he went rigid, and she did not touch him. She only stood inside the ring of his cold, where no one stood, and made him look at her. You are not the only one who spent a life wanting nothing, she said. I was better at it than you. I made myself nothing, all the way down, for 21 years, and then I met a cold, impossible man who could not scent me, and had to learn my whole self the slow way. By looking, and for the first time in my life, I was seen. Do you think I will give that up? Do you think I will crawl back into being no one? To save the one person who ever saw me? You are a fool, Soren. You are a brave and stubborn and generous fool, and I am not going anywhere. I would rather freeze, he said low, than be your murderer. The words fell into the warm room and lay there. They had been given this, a handful of warm days in a green valley at the end of the world, a man learning to laugh and a woman learning to be seen, and it was going to be taken the way warmth was always taken. She would not pay that bill. She had decided. She simply had not yet found the shape of how. There is another road, my lady. Brannock had come in behind her, and Brannock had heard the tale of the tower too, and the old steward looked between them with the whole of it plain in his face. The old women's tale. If your touch stays the rhyme, then the rhyme can be broken. One soul to hold him, wanting nothing. You could do more than keep him alive a night at a time. You could lift it whole. You could save him. And, if I burn, Lynette said quietly, for she had not forgotten the tower. The Flatiron? No. The tale does not say it burns the one who breaks it, Brannock said. The tale says it lifts. I am an old man, my lady, and I have watched this cold eat a good king, 1 year at a time, and I have watched you these last weeks do a thing no healer in Kelvard could do. I do not think that is nothing. I do not think you are nothing. He bowed to her then, low. The bow owed a queen, the first true one she had been given in that whole cold country. If there is any soul alive who can hold him, it is the one his cold has never once been able to touch. And Lynette, who had offered exactly this once and been refused, felt the hope come up in her so hard and so bright that it drowned every warning under it. She would not ask him again. She would simply do it. She would hold the cold back until it broke, and let him rage at her after. Alive, she did not let herself think about the word that had frightened her in the tower. Wager. She thought only that he was dying, and that she loved him, and that she would not sit 3 strides away and watch it happen with the cure in her own 2 hands. She would hold him whether he willed it or not. She looked at the failing king by the window, and she made up her mind. She went to him that night, when the valley was dark, and the spring breathed its white steam under the stars, and she did not ask. She had thought climbing to him that she would be afraid. She was not. She had passed through fear into the flat, clear country on the far side of it, where there is only the thing that must be done. She had watched him spend himself for her at the feast. Without a heartbeat's hesitation, she could do no less. If the tale was true, she would break his cold and give him back his life and his wolf and his crown. And he could be as angry as he liked about it once he was whole enough to be angry at all. He was sitting by the low fire, wrapped against a cold no fire could reach, and he looked up when she came in, and something in her face must have warned him, because he said "Linnet," in a voice with an edge of fear in it, and began to rise. She crossed the room before he could. She took his bare hand between both of hers, deliberately, with her whole heart set on one thing: to break the cold, to save him, to hold the rime back by main force until it let him go. And the rime bit her? It came up her fingers in a bloom of gray frost and a pain like white fire, and she cried out and did not let go, because letting go was losing him. And the cold poured into her hands, savage and delighted, as though it had been waiting, as though it had known she would come at it like this, and had saved its whole cruelty for the moment she did. It was nothing like the tower, where she had felt only the absence of cold. This was presence, total and gleeful, a cold with teeth and a will, and it climbed her wrists and reached for the warmth of her, the way a starving thing reaches for meat. She heard herself make a sound she had never made before. And still she held on, because she had come to save him, and saving him was worth her hands, worth her arms, worth whatever it cost, and that was the whole of her mistake, laid bare in a single held breath. Soren wrenched his hand free and flung himself back from her with a sound of pure horror, and Linnet stood swaying with her hands held out before her, gray to the wrist, the feeling already going out of them, and understood too late what she had done. It did not work when she reached for it. That was the shape of the thing, the cruel joke at the heart of the old tale that no one had ever solved. The cold could be held only by one who wanted nothing, and the moment she had reached to save him she had wanted the whole world, wanted his life, wanted the cure, and the wanting had poisoned the very gift. In the gray hour she had held him whole, because she had wanted nothing but to rest. Tonight, she had wanted to save him, and the saving had burned her. "What have you done?" Soren said, ragged on his knees across the room from her. "What have you done, you foolish, you?" And then he stopped, because Linnet was weeping now, from the pain and the failure and the ruin of the one hope, and weeping had done what a lifetime of careful holding had guarded against. The mask tore through. Her whole hidden self broke up out of her at once, undammed, and the little warm room filled with the scent she had buried her entire life, and Soren, who had never once in all their nights together been able to scent her, went utterly still, because he could scent her now. He said it the way you name a thing out of a nightmare you had thought was only a story. "You are Hearthborn." His gray face had gone grayer. "You are the last of the Hearthborn. That is what they would kill you for. Not because you can save me, because of what you are worth." Every wolf child in the north was raised on the tail of them, the warm-blooded line whose touch could thaw any curse and mend any wound, whose women had been carried from kingdom to kingdom in the old wars like living treasure, seized and locked in warded rooms, drained of their gift until there was nothing left of them. The last of them had been hunted down, a generation gone. Or, so the tale said, the line ended, the warmth gone out of the world for good. "They did not all die," Linnet said. Her voice had gone flat and far away. The voice she used for the things that lived at the very bottom of her. Some of them learned to disappear. My grandmother was taken when she was 14 and kept 11 years, and died of it. My mother was born in that warded room and got out of it, somehow, and spent her whole life running, and taught me the one thing that had kept her alive: be nothing, give a wolf's nose nothing to find. Fold yourself down so small and so cold that no one will ever guess there is warmth in you to want. She looked at her ruined gray hands. "I have been nothing so long. I nearly believed it myself. And then you looked at me, and I forgot to be careful. And now you know, and now I am worth taking again. And it is the most dangerous thing that has ever happened to me, to be known by you." Soren looked at her and she felt through the fading bond. The exact moment his resolve went hard as iron, and she knew, before he spoke, that she had lost. "Then you must be no one again," he said. "You must go tonight, and you must never let another living soul catch what I have just caught, and you must forget you ever came here." He got to his feet, swaying, terrible, a dying man with winter in his chest and his mind made up. "I will send for Ferran. I will give him the regency, the crown, whatever he wants, in exchange for one thing only: safe passage for a hollow servant girl out of Kelvard." "He will not do it," she said. "He wants you dead too badly. He wants the crown more. I have watched him want it his whole life. If I put it in his hands freely, tonight, with no war and no council to fight, he will take it, and he will let one nameless girl walk out of Kelvard, because letting her go costs him nothing, and killing her risks everything he has just been handed. I know my cousin. His greed is the one thing in this world I can still use." He swayed where he stood, gray and certain and terrible. "You will go west with Brannock. You will let the warmth die back down in you until no one can catch it. You will find some small green place at the far end of the world, and you will grow old there, warm and free, and no one will ever hunt you again, and that will be the one good thing I did, with a bad rain. Do not look at me like that. Do not you dare grieve me. Letting you live is the only warm thing left in me. Lynette, do not take it away." And Lynette stood with her burned hands cradled against her, and could not make him understand, because he was not wrong about Ferran, and he was not wrong about the danger, and he was wrong only about the one thing that mattered, which was that she would rather die warm beside him than live cold and safe and alone for 50 empty years. She could not find the words for it. Not yet, but she could feel them coming, the way you feel the weather change, and he was already turning for the door. He was gone from the room before she found her feet. She heard him in the yard, calling hoarsely for Brannock, calling for a horse, for parchment, for a rider to carry his surrender north to Ferran before his own courage failed. And she stood in the little warm room with the fire and the steam and her ruined hands and let herself understand, at last, the thing the old tale had been trying to tell her all along. The cold could be held only by one who wanted nothing. She had thought that meant nothing for herself, no crown, no reward. But that was not it at all. It meant nothing from him. It meant a hold, with no purpose in it, no bargain, no saving, no fixing, no future asked for in return. It meant touching him, not because it would break the rhyme, not because it would keep him alive, not because she needed him to live, but only because she loved him and could not keep her hands off him for one more hour of the little time he had. It meant loving the man and not the cure. She stood very still in the warm room and felt the whole of it turn over in her mind, like a key finding its ward at last. Every time she had come near him wanting nothing, the cold had let her be. The night she caught the casement, thinking only to keep the iron off his head. The gray hour on the longest night, when she had wanted nothing in all the world but to close her eyes for one moment against his shoulder. Both times she had reached for the man and not for the thing he could give her, and both times the cold had found nothing to catch. And every time she had come at him with want in her hands, the offer in the tower, the desperate grasping tonight, the cold had answered the want and burned her for it. The rhyme was not cruel, it was only exact. It had been waiting 9 years for someone to hold the man and not the cure, and no one ever had because no one had ever loved him past the wanting of what he might become if only the cold would lift. She had reached for the cure, and it had burned her. She had not yet reached for him. She went out into the cold yard. The night met her hard and clean, the stars fierce overhead, the steam of the spring rising ghostly between the dark hills, and there he was at the horse's head, a dying king riding away his crown by the light of a held lantern, spending the last of himself to buy her a life she did not want without him in it. Brannock stood a little apart, the parchment already half in his hand, his old face wrung, because he too could see what the king was doing and could not, as a servant, forbid it. Both men turned when the door opened. Both men saw her burned hands held out and open again, unwrapped, bare, and both men understood at once what she meant to do with them, and Soren's face went white, with a fear worse than any the cold had ever put there. "No," he said. "Lynette, no, I forbid. I do not want to save you," she said. He went still. "I have wanted to save you since the first cold night in the tower, and it burned me, because it was a lie, not the wanting you alive, that was never the lie. The lie was thinking. I ever came near you, for that. I did not marry the cure, Soren. I did not sit night after night by your fire for the rhyme. I sat there for you. The hard, cold, stubborn, ungrateful, impossible whole of you, who forgot the words for come closer and taught himself to ask me anyway." She was crying again, and smiling, and she stepped in against him, into the ring of frozen air. No living soul crossed, and she did not reach for the cold at all. "So, I am not going to save you, I am just going to hold you. Because I love you, and I am done pretending I came here for any other reason. Let the cold do what it likes." And she put her arms around the cold king of Kelvard, and laid her burned hands flat against his back, and held him, wanting nothing, asking nothing, only holding him, because she could not bear not to. The rhyme did not bite her. She felt it decide. She felt the cold gather itself in him, the whole vast winter of it, coiled to strike at the warmth that had come inside its ring. And she did not flinch, and did not grasp, and only held on, giving it nothing to catch, no fear, no want, no hunger for its ending, and the cold, finding nothing at all to close its teeth on, at last let go. It did not happen the way the breaking of a thing happens. It happened the way a thaw happens. Slow, and then all at once. A whole frozen country giving way to spring in the space of a few held breaths. She felt the frost recede from his skin under her cheek. She felt the deep buried cold in his chest, the stone against his heart that the healer had grieved over, begin to soften at the edges and shrink and go. She held on. She did not grasp at it, did not hurry it, did not let one flicker of come on, then let go, please slip into her, because the moment it did, the cold would feel the want and turn on her again. She only held the man, and named her warm things against his chest, hearth and bread and sun on a south wall in spring, the whole poor list of her whole poor childhood, until the last of the rhyme let go of the last of him and was simply gone, out into the night, up into the stars. The long years of winter breathed out at last. Somewhere deep in him, something she had been told was dead, lifted its head and breathed, his wolf. Not silenced after all, only frozen. Only waiting for the thaw. Lynette. Her name came out of him, wrecked and wondering, and his arms came up around her, bare hands spread across her back. Warm, warm, a living man's warmth, and he held her the way a man holds the one thing that has ever kept him from the dark. "You are warm. I can feel you. I can feel." "I know," she said, into his chest, laughing, weeping. "I know. I feel you, too." The bond between them was not a thread anymore, and not a crack. It was a wide, bright, open thing, and through it, his joy poured into her and hers into him, until she could not have said whose was whose. That, she understood, was the thing his cold had cost him all those years. Not touch alone, but this. The simple animal comfort of not being alone inside your own skin, which he had gone without, since he was 7 years old, on a white moor, and would never go without again. He drew back only far enough to look at her, and his eyes were not cold at all now. They were blue and bright and streaming, and he lifted one bare hand, slowly, wonderingly, and laid it against her cheek, skin to skin, the touch that had killed every soul who ever dared it, and it did not burn, and it did not freeze. It was only a warm hand on a cold night. And Lynette turned her face into it, and wept for joy. 9 years, he said. 9 years, and no one could touch me, and I did not want them to. And then a hollow girl fell asleep on my shoulder and would not stay away. His thumb moved across her cheek. I do not want the cold back. I do not want the crown. I want the one thing I spent my whole reign making certain I could never have. He pressed his forehead to hers. You, only you. Wanting nothing but you. And the cold king, who was not cold anymore, kissed his hollow queen in the steam and the starlight, and behind them, Brannock stood in the doorway, with the abandoned surrender in his hand, and tears on his old folded face, because he had served 3 kings, and had never once seen one thaw. They did not speak for a long while, the 3 of them in the warm dark. A king made new, a queen no longer hidden. An old man weeping quietly by the door. And then Soren lifted his head, and Lynette felt the change come through the bond before she saw it in his face, the warmth going hard and bright and certain, a living alpha king, waking fully to himself for the first time in 9 years. His wolf was awake in him, his strength was coming back with every breath, and somewhere to the north, in the great cold hall that had called her no one, his cousin was gathering the court to take a crown off a dead man's head. Soren, she said, I know. He drew her hand into his warm fingers, threading through her healing ones, and there was something in his eyes she had never seen there before, not in all their careful nights. They have called the whole court to Valeholm to see Ferran crowned. The corner of his mouth lifted, that rusty, unused thing, gone suddenly wolfish. I think we should not disappoint them. I think we should give the court of Kelvard a return they will tell their grandchildren about. He looked down at their joined hands. Bare skin to bare skin, warm and whole. Let us go and be seen. They rode back to Valeholm as spring turned to summer, because Ferran had called the court to see him crowned. He had not waited. In the end, with the king fled and dying, or so he believed, Ferran had pressed the council until they bent, and named the longest day for the passing of the crown, and summoned every noble in Kelvard to witness the golden cousin take at last the throne he had schemed a lifetime to reach. The whole court gathered in the great hall where Lynette had once been called no one and refused. 600 faces turned toward the high seat, and Ondine of House Vantry stood at Ferran's shoulder in cloth of gold, and the crown of Kelvard sat waiting on its cushion, and everything was exactly as they had built it, brick by patient brick. The doors opened. The king of Kelvard came up the long floor of his own hall, and he came alone down the center of it with no ring of cleared stone around him, and no frost at his heels, warm and unhurried, and entirely alive. And the hall fell into a silence so complete that Lynette could hear her own steps beside his. He wore no gloves. That was the thing the court saw first before they understood the rest. The cold king's hands were bare. Ferran had gone, the color of ash. You are dead, he said, and it came out of him before he could stop it, in front of everyone. You are supposed to. I am supposed to be a great many things, Soren said. Cold, childless, bewitched. Dying in a ditch with a hollow girl for company, his voice carried to the walls. Your words, cousin. I heard them all, in the end, and the blade at the winter feast. And the coin. Your lady's house, paid a guardian, at Braywick, to plant a bride you could refuse before 600 witnesses, so that you might stay free and first in line behind a king you were counting on to die. The hall had begun to murmur, a low tide of it rising. You built a very fine machine. It had only the one flaw. It needed me to die of the cold, and the cold is gone. Brannock had done his work well in the quiet weeks. There were men in that hall who had taken House Vantry's coin and were glad now to say so, loudly, before they could be named first by someone else. There was the guardian from Braywick, brought south under guard, who wept and confessed the whole ugly bargain to save his neck. It did not take long, once the king stood warm and living at the head of his own hall, for the machines makers to be buried under the testimony of the very men they had bought. Ferran had built his whole life on the certainty that Soren would die, and now the king lived, and there was no plan left in him, at all. Soren turned then, in front of all of them, and he held out his bare hand, and Lynette, in a plain, grey gown, with no scent that any of them could read, and no rank that any of them could name, walked out of the crowd and put her hand in his. His fingers closed warm around hers. And every soul in that hall, who had watched for 9 years as no living thing dared touch the king of Kelvard, watched the Hollow Queen hold his bare hand and take no hurt at all, and the murmur became a roar. Ondine moved first, because Ondine always moved first. She caught Ferran's sleeve, already turning for the side doors, already reckoning the road out, but the guards Brannock had placed there were not Ferran's guards anymore, and there was nowhere in the hall to go. Whatever came after for the two of them, a cell, a trial, a long cold road into exile, it came after. In the hall in the moment the machine simply stopped, and its makers stood in the wreckage of it with the whole court staring. And no crown was passed that day but the one already on Sorin's brow. Farron looked at Linnet as the guards closed in, and she saw him truly see her at last, the way he had never troubled to see her at the altar. The nothing he had thrown away now standing warm and beloved at the side of the king he had wanted to be. "What are you?" he said low, only to her. Linnet thought of her mother, hidden, her grandmother, caged, a whole line hunted to the edge of the world for the warmth in their blood. She thought that she did not have to be no one anymore. Not with this man's warm hand around hers, and this man's wolf at her back, and this man who would, she knew all the way down, burn the world flat before he let another soul lay a hand on her. "I am the queen," she said. That was always enough. You simply never looked. Later, when the hall had emptied and the long spring evening came gold across the courtyard, they stood together at the high window and watched the light go warm across the stones. And Sorin kept her hand in his as though he still could not quite believe he was allowed to, which he never entirely would. "They will talk," he said, "about what you are. It will get out in the end." "Let them talk," Linnet said. "People always do. We might as well give them something worth the breath." She leaned her head against his shoulder, the way she had that first gray morning, when she had not known she was doing it, and felt the warmth of him come up steady and sure through the bond that would never close again. "The man no one could touch, the woman no one could see. I think that will keep the court busy for years." He laughed, that rough, unused sound gone easy now with use, and put his warm arm around her and held her, wanting nothing, which was the only way it had ever worked. They had each spent a lifetime learning to be untouchable, one by cold and one by hiding. And in the end, the only thing that ever saved either of them was the thing they had both been most afraid to do. They had reached for each other, with nothing at all in their hands, and asked for nothing back, and been held. And that, it turned out, was everything. If you are still here at the end of it, thank you, truly. I want to know what you thought. Was Sorin right to try to send her away, to trade his life and his crown for hers, because he could not bear to be the thing that got her killed? Or was he a stubborn fool who very nearly threw away the one love that could save him all in the name of protecting her? Tell me in the comments. I read every one, and I would love to know whose side you landed on. If this story kept you warm to the end, stay a while. There is another one already waiting for you, and I will see you there.